And now, live from England, bringing you news and analysis that you won't find on the corporate and government mainstream media. It's the WideShut Webcast.
Hello again, Resistors. Today is October 24th, 2011, and you are tuned in to the WideShut Webcast with me, Keelan Balderson. My website is wideshut.co.uk, and for the network it's resistradio.com. Anyway, what a wild few weeks it's been on planet Earth. I'm not one of those 2012 freaks or anything, but you can't deny that there's something in the air. Maybe it's because I'm young and I've not really lived through any of the great changes of the past, but I get this feeling that we're going through a big transition right now. Gaddafi was assassinated, the Occupy movement is going global. If it's not totally failed, there's going to be massive restructuring in the EU, further ramping up against countries like Iran, and obviously the economy is still continuing to implode on itself. If you think we're going to recover, if you think this is just a credit crunch, some more newspeak there, then you really need to do some more reading about how we got here and why we're in this mess. There is so much debt right now, it's mathematically impossible for it to be paid back without borrowing more money to pay it back, which just makes the debt bigger. You see how ridiculous their system is. And any austerity measures that are being imposed are just being used as a form of control, because the system can't be corrected in its current form. So why are they carrying on like it can be? Well, because it keeps us locked into that illusion and keeps the illusion of their power in place. But as I say, I think change is inevitable. Something's coming. I just worry what form that change is going to take. You know, this is going to build into a crescendo. Something's going to happen. But I just worry what exactly that is. So I'm not a 2012 freak, but it's almost self-evident that global change is happening. You can look out your window and see it happening. There's people on the streets. And of course the Mayans never said it was the end of the world. That's just something Hollywood and sensationalists have run with. I think it's more accurately interpreted as the end of an age. The end of the world as we know it, as the song was singing. The dawning of a new era. And I think we've got to keep in mind why we started this resistance. Why did we get into this thing? And maybe I'm speaking for myself here. I don't know about anyone else, but I think we can sometimes get bogged down in the detail. And I'm not saying we shouldn't. That's one of my major issues with the Occupy movement, the lack of detail in their demands and arguments. But what I mean is, we may at times miss the bigger picture. At times I think I forget why I got into the, quote, resistance. And to put it simply, it was to spread awareness and hopefully prevent the emergence of a global centralised government, commonly called the New World Order. And what we're seeing right now with these protests and the economy continuing to collapse and the continuation of wars is the start of an inevitable global change. But what's worrying me in the back of my mind is that this spirit of revolution, as it grows around the world, as these changes take place, we've got to be careful that we don't fall headfirst into the very thing that many of us are fighting against. The One World Order agenda is an old agenda. Forget about the new bit. That's just the brand of what it's called. It's an old agenda. It's clearly documented back to the late 1800s with Cecil Rhodes and his roundtable groups, the birth of the CFR and the Royal Institute of International Affairs, which then brought about the League of Nations. which then brought about the United Nations. And then we had the Bilderberg Group, which brought about the EU. And all this is there for people to see, the growth of this global government. It's blindingly obvious if you do just a basic, just a basic level of research. And I'm not saying that as one people we shouldn't come together. But these systems that have been put in place were never natural. These things didn't just happen. They were pushed through by small elite think tanks. The average person was guided to where we are today. And I guess if you want to be a bit more speculative, you can take it back further than the late 1800s, like many people do. But the point is, it's documented. So let's not be naive about what we're up against. These people haven't remained in power and pushed through their agenda because they're stupid. We're not up against morons. The central bankers, the top level commercial bankers, the owners of the mega corporations that carve up the world's resources, they're not just going to give it all up without a fight. So I'm going to assume that they have somewhat of an idea about what's next, and they're going to try their hardest to remain in power. It would be naive to think that they haven't foreseen mass protests. So what I'm saying is, just be careful. When this change comes, and it's already started, don't be tempted to get swept up in it all. Don't just follow the herd. Revolution can be fun. It's fun to be at protests. But virtually no revolution has ever worked out yet for the average person. What makes us think we're so special? So personally, I'm going to have to take a step back from the mob and just observe. Let's just see what's really going on. Let's take some time to think things through. Because I'm no longer comfortable, I guess, being in the thick of it. Not that I was necessarily in the thick of it to begin with, but I'm gonna say it now. I'm not part of the Occupy movement. I'm gonna stand and observe, and I'm gonna properly think about it. If I hear calls for global democracy, where the world is gonna be fairly represented, I'm going to think and say, no, actually, I want my sovereignty. I want my personal freedom. I mean, ask yourself a question. Has democracy ever worked yet? So what makes you think it's going to work globally? If I hear calls for a world currency or a world financial system to solve the debt crisis or to fix the EU's debt crisis, I'm going to say no. Because I know that that's the kind of thing these people have wanted for a long time. The banking system is bad enough as it is. Imagine total centralized control over finance. Even if it starts off well-meaning, with good people who want to get rid of the corruption and the power that some of these people have. Even if it's implemented with the greatest of intentions. It only has to fall in the wrong hands, and then those people have complete control over the world's economy. And I'm not just talking out of my arse. Today, in fact, the Vatican calls for Central World Bank to be set up. And this is CNBC. Let me just paste that into the chat. I think somebody already pasted a version of it in anyway. Hulliam. Vatican calls for Central World Bank. The Vatican called on Monday for the establishment of a global public authority and a Central World Bank to rule over financial institutions that have become outdated and often ineffective in dealing fairly with crises. A major document from the Vatican's Justice and Peace Department should be music to the ears of the Occupy Wall Street demonstrators, oh really, and similar movements around the world who have protested against the economic downturn. Yeah, caused by central banks. The 18-page document towards reforming the international financial and monetary systems in the context of a global public authority was at times very specific, calling, for example, for taxation measures on financial transactions. So I guess that's either a banker tax, which is never going to work out because they'll just pass on that tax to the people through, I don't know, making their services cost more. You get the idea. Or if it's some kind of global tax on everybody, then, I don't want any part of that. The economic and financial crisis which the world is going through calls everyone, individuals and peoples, to examine in depth the principles and the cultural and moral values at the basis of social coexistence, the report said. It condemned what it called the idolatry of the market, as well as the neoliberal thinking that it said looked exclusively at technical solutions to the economic problems. In fact, the crisis has revealed behaviours like selfishness, collective greed and hoarding of goods on a great scale. So how is making a world central bank going to solve that? It's just going to put it in fewer hands. I don't understand. It said, adding that world economies needed an ethic of solidarity among rich and poor nations. Well, the Vatican hoards half the world's wealth, for God's sake. But anyway, if no solutions are found to various forms of injustice, the negative effects that will follow on the social, political and economic level will be destined to create a climate of growing hostility and even violence. And ultimately, so basically saying, oh, it's going to get violent, quick, let's have our World Bank. It called for the establishment of a supranational authority with worldwide scope and universal jurisdiction to guide economic policies and decisions. I guess God will be running this World Bank, or maybe the Antichrist, depending on how you look at the Vatican. Such an authority should start with the United Nations, oh lovely, as its reference point, but later become independent and be endowed with the power to see that developed countries were not allowed to wield excessive power over the weaker countries. Well, we'll just exert excessive power over every country together, and you can all be slaves under the World Bank. It looks like people are jumping on the bandwagon here and are basically trying to steer the Occupy Wall Street movement. It says in the article, this should be music to the ears of the Occupy Wall Street demonstrators. Really? I mean, are they calling for a world central bank? Is that what they want? Why are you trying to spin it that way? And like I say, any kind of global system that has an element of governance or control, it means bad people can exert their influence over everyone. And this has nothing to do with quote conspiracy theories. Even if you believe everything that's happening right now is natural and globalization was just part of human evolution and that the Vatican are good people and not pedos, and they don't hoard half the world's wealth in their vaults. It doesn't matter if you don't believe in any of that. If there's the potential for control freaks to take centralized control over the planet, then we need to remove that potential. So no matter what you believe, I still don't understand how you can think global governance is a good thing. We can't have that. We can't have a global currency or bank, or global democracy, or global anything, because it's open to abuse. At least if it's just one corrupt country, there's a chance of winning back freedom for that country. Imagine how hard it will be when the gate shuts around the entire earth. It's not natural for the human race to be under one system of control. We can be one spiritually, we can share our ideas globally, I mean that's what the internet's doing. We can absolutely interact and trade and visit each other's countries and all these things. But being governed globally, in my opinion, means the end to freedom. Why did we stop Hitler? If a global empire was so bad, or so good, sorry. If we're all for you know, global governance, world banks, world this, world that. Why did we stop people like Hitler? That's exactly what he wanted. Why did we end the overt control of the British Empire? I thought global control was now a good thing. It's because global government and empire is global tyranny. Even if it's sold as a global democracy, you either get global mob rule, one group just controlling everybody else, 51% controlling everybody else, or you get elites using the mechanism of government to benefit themselves like they're already doing. Why would you want that on a global scale? Oh, well, what about representational or direct democracy or all these new things that people are coming up with? Well, you're still bowing down to a centralised system. You're still asking Big Brother to give you your rights. You're still voting people to represent you. And I was thinking the other night, what is democracy? Why do we vote? And I think I boiled it down quite easily with, I've just got a little quote here. This is why I think people vote. When people vote, they're either voting for more control or voting for more freedom. It's that simple. You either feel downtrodden and want things to change, so you vote for somebody who you think will help you because you're experiencing some kind of tyranny. You know, you may have voted for UKIP because you wanted out of the EU or whatever. Or you vote because you want more control. You're a big company and you want this new legislation to go through, or you want a tax break or whatever. You either want less control or more control. But either way, your vote usually gives the state more control anyway. So going forward, I think I'm just going to be an observer. I'm going to analyse, I'm going to share ideas and opinions, but I'm not necessarily going to associate myself with any particular movement. I'm not necessarily going to endorse something. But anyway, something that's kind of related, we're going to jump to this week's New World Order quote of the week, and we have Mikhail Gorbachev, the former Soviet leader, speaking to Lafayette College in the United States. And this is a very interesting speech that he gave. I'm going to paste this into the chat. Here we go. Mikhail Gorbachev. This is what he said during a speech at Lafayette College. We are reaping the consequences of a strategy that is not conducive to cooperation and partnership, to living in a new global situation. The world needs goals that will bring people together. Some people in the United States were pushing the idea of creating a global American empire. Well, I think he's wrong there. I think it's more of an Anglo-American Israeli empire. But anyway, and that was mistaken from the start. Other people in America are now giving thought to the future of their country. The big banks, the big corporations are still paying the same big bonuses to their bosses. Was there ever a crisis for them? My friend, the late Pope John Paul II, said it best. He said, we need a new world order, one that is more stable, more humane and more just. Others, including myself, have spoken about a new world order, but we are still facing the problems of building such a world order. Problems of the environment, of backwardness and poverty, food shortages, all because we do not have a system of global governance. We cannot leave things as they were before. When we are seeing that these protests are moving to even new countries, that almost all countries are now witnessing such protests, that the people want change. As we are addressing these challenges, these problems raised by these protest movements, we will gradually find our way towards the new world order. Now, for a lot of us, that's a very jumbled speech, because when we hear the word New World Order, it's quite a scary thing. And I think there's two ways you can look at this speech. Obviously, the term New World Order is a neutral term. It can apply to any kind of change to the world. It's just a neutral term. It doesn't necessarily mean a global fascist dictatorship, as I generally think that it is. But when collectivist, communist Gorbachev calls for a new world order, what I'm saying is he's not necessarily talking about the same kind of system as when Obama or Bush or Blair or whoever else is talking about a new world order, the Anglo-American Israeli version of the new world order. In a certain context, you could say the Cold War can be defined as a war for control of the new world order. But let's make something very clear here. Gorbachev's version of the New World Order is just as tyrannical as any other version. Like I said, any kind of global power structure is anathema to freedom. It's the complete opposite. So you can look at it as Gorbachev using the Occupy movement, playing on the left-wing elements within it to sort of give himself a talking shop for his anti-capitalist, collectivist vision. And I hope that most people would see through that. But then there, of course, are those that are a bit more speculative, and I'm not saying they're wrong exactly, and there's people out there that see the communist ideology as simply the left wing to the fascist ideology, a sort of global false left-right paradigm. Either way, it's still global tyranny, whether it's a communist state stamping on your head or a corporate fascist state stamping on your head. It's still a global new world order stamping on your head. And there is evidence, as written about by Professor Anthony C. Sutton, that Wall Street actually funded and aided people like Karl Marx. The whole idea was to enslave Russia in what was called a captive state. In other words, while Russia was stuck under communism, they weren't so much of a threat to the robber barons, to the crony capitalists of America. It's almost like they wanted to just tuck them away in a corner of the world and keep them contained under this collectivist system. But then, of course, it started to spread around the world, and we got the Cold War, because I guess in the crony capitalist eyes, communism was beginning to encroach on their own business dealings and sweeping the world where they wanted to pillage the resources. So some people speculate that people like Gorbachev and the Anglo-American establishment are actually in cahoots, and both sides are really just centrally steered, and they want the same ending to it all. Personally, I don't think it's quite that simple, and I don't really think it matters. Any kind of artificial one world system or global government, in my opinion, can go to hell, because as far as I'm concerned, I want my freedom. So it doesn't matter which way you look at it, I don't want a new world order. But we could be ranting about that all night, so I'm going to move on to some headlines. Time flies here on Resistance Radio. I did mention briefly earlier, obviously the big story of the week is, of course, the barbaric slaying of Gaddafi. And if anything exposes the hypocrisy of the West, it's actions like that. The slaying, the murder of Gaddafi. It's Hillary Clinton laughing, overjoyed that another human being has been murdered, even though he's done absolutely nothing to her or America in any way. And this has become a common tactic. They pick a foreign leader who they want out of the way so they can gain more control. They make up certain claims that are hard to verify or are controversial, or there's another side to the coin. They use left cover and blab about, we need to save civilians, humanitarianism, we need to get rid of this dictator. Then they bomb the hell out of the country and assassinate the dictator while civilians die anyway. No trial, no real empirical proof, no case really made against him. But he's dead and his country's bombed to bits. And we're supposed to be the beacon of freedom in all of that. At least Saddam Hussein got a kangaroo court. Obviously he was, you know, I'm not saying Saddam was a good guy either, but obviously his court case was just a complete stitch-up. But Gaddafi doesn't even get that. He just gets a stick up his ass and a bullet in his head. So I'm going to go for a quick break, and then I'm going to come back and just recap this whole ridiculous invasion of Libya, the murder of Gaddafi, and everything else. Okay, welcome back to the WideShut Webcast with me, Keelan Balderson, and we're going to be getting into now a bit about the murder of Gaddafi. Obviously, it wasn't necessarily NATO forces that killed Gaddafi, even though they were quite clearly bombing any place they could, you know, get their hands on where they thought that he was. So to me, it's just the same as if they assassinated him with a CIA agent or a troop or whatever. You know, Hillary Clinton loved it. They've all said that they're happy now he's dead. That was their main goal. They just had to hide behind some rebels that they were funding, that had links to Al-Qaeda, of course, which again is just a complete mind-boggling situation to think that people who killed troops, commanders have now come out, Al-Qaeda members that have killed Western troops, are now the rebels in Libya that we're supporting. Now, to me, it's not that surprising, because I know that Al-Qaeda from its inception has been created and ran by the West. But to the people that have been sold this war on terror, to hear that Al-Qaeda is now the good guys, more or less, is a little bit of a mind twister. But yeah, this whole Gaddafi situation, it just exposes the whole hypocrisy of the West. The Western powers have invaded more countries than any other country or region combined. The West are the terrorists, and the people they accuse of being terrorists were created by them. And we're the beacon of freedom, apparently. Let me just send a message. Maybe, I know they're probably not listening and I'm preaching to the choir, so let's beam it, let's meditate it to them. But just because we've collectively agreed to believe in the illusion that England or the US are honest and free countries working for the betterment of mankind doesn't make it true, unfortunately. We bomb, we pillage, we execute, we torture. And just because you can watch Coronation Street or X Factor and have holidays in Benidorm doesn't make that any less of a fact. We are the world's terrorists. And let me get into this. This is a headline from the Sun newspaper, which happens to be the most read newspaper in Britain. And their headline, after the death of Gaddafi, they had no qualms about showing his bloodied face all over. Big letters, "This is for Lockerbie and Yvonne Fletcher." Well, Megrahi was stitched up, and Libya weren't behind Lockerbie. Evidence was planted, as testified by the engineer of the circuit board fragment used to convict him. And Yvonne Fletcher was actually killed by a bullet that most likely came from an adjacent building to the Libyan embassy that was actually rented out by MI5. But don't let facts get in the way of a good Murdoch news story. And look, I don't deny that Gaddafi was a dictator, or that he killed some of his opposition. Kind of like how Dr. David Kelly was murdered by the Blair administration. But even if Gaddafi was offing his opposition, that doesn't mean we rush in as the deluded world police and pillaged the country dry for the corporations. I was always taught that two wrongs don't make a right. And for the politicians to stand up and talk like what they did was honourable, it makes me physically sick. It might be honourable if what they're saying was true, but they're lying hypocrites. Cameron calling it a successful mission. We had to go and protect the Libyan civilians. NATO bombed the hell out of the civilians. And in case you didn't realise, a lot of the Libyan people supported Gaddafi. But I guess once you support Gaddafi after he's been labelled the bad guy, then anyone supporting Gaddafi is no longer considered a civilian. They're considered Gaddafi's forces, so they don't go on the statistics. But even then, they've still killed innocent civilians that were opposed to Gaddafi, because bombs blow shit up, and if you're near one, you die. And me and Mr. Brit did an article the other day on this. I'll just paste in that link. And yeah, let's go to the quotes from our new Defence Secretary Philip Hammond, because Liam Fox was off gallivanting with Zionists somewhere and had to be replaced. This is what our Defence Secretary said. Keep that in mind, Defence Secretary. Libya is a relatively wealthy country with oil reserves, and I expect there will be opportunities for British and other companies to get involved in the reconstruction of Libya, he told the BBC in an interview. I would expect British companies, even British sales directors, to be packing their suitcases and looking to get out to Libya and take part in the reconstruction of the country as soon as they can. Now, as far as I know, defence is when you protect yourself from an aggressor. So why on earth is our Defence Secretary encouraging corporations to go make a pretty penny off an unprovoked bombing campaign? That doesn't sound like defence to me. That sounds like attack. Attack and pillage. And it always makes me laugh when the warmongering right-wingers say, well, we should get Libyan oil for our British companies. As if BP is in any way beneficial to the average person in this country. It's a multinational corporation. It's not British. And if you think petrol prices are going to go down when they get Libyan oil, then you're extremely deluded. Let's put this into perspective. A government that is 4.8 trillion in debt is encouraging private global companies to make a profit. Now, I'm not suggesting we should steal any of Libya's oil, but it just shows how the government is never working for the interests of the people. You'd think maybe they'd want the oil for themselves, you know, to pay off their own debts, but instead we borrow over £1 billion to fund the bombing, and then we give the spoils away afterwards. I mean, Mr. Defence Secretary, please explain in what way this operation has defended the well-being of this country's citizens. It's made us poorer, and you've given more profits to the corporations that are screwing us already. This doesn't really compute. He claimed the bombing campaign that murdered countless civilians, who they pledged to protect, was hugely successful, and that Britain now needed to support the Libyans to turn the liberation of their country into a successful stabilisation, so that Libya can become a beacon of prosperity and democracy in North Africa going forward. And this is really where the media spin comes in. They've never really been honest about the economy of Libya. The average person, you know, probably thinks Libya is a bit like Afghanistan, just a bunch of huts and some desert. Well, actually, Libya is one of the most prosperous nations in North Africa. Quality of life and well-being is comparable to European countries. if not better. Libya owed no debt. They were better off economically than we are. And then, of course, Gaddafi wanted to use a gold-backed currency, the dinar, which would have protected Africa from the collapsing global economy and freed Africa from the Western cartels. And the big irony here is that the protests in America, in Europe, Australia, etc., are against the very people that have used and abused the Western financial system. So the very system a lot of us are now rallying against was what Gaddafi was protecting his people from. But the Western-backed rebels quickly installed a central bank. So that really tells you who's behind all of this. It's not about saving civilians. It's about financial control. It's about resources. It's about full spectrum dominance. It's about the New World Order. And if you think this is going to be the end of violence in Libya, or that they're now going to be progressive, think again. We've handed over the country to a bunch of nut jobs running around with AK-47s who think it's appropriate to sodomise Gaddafi before executing him. And then they think it's fine to display his body in a meat counter. And there's going to be factions of them turning on each other. There's going to be more civilian deaths. Give it a few years and we'll probably be back to invade again. But this time it will be something like, oh, Islamic extremists have taken over Libya. We must go and stop them, Al-Qaeda. No shit, you put them in there. And what's even more worrying, I don't think I've even seen one politician speak out about the campaign. Or the invasion, let's be honest, that's what it was. When you bomb a country, it's an invasion. You're invading and destroying it. And I was watching BBC's Question Time last week. I think it airs on Thursday. I watched it on Saturday. And the mantra seems to be, but the UN resolution. You know, when people ask, why are we in Libya? I don't think it's a good idea. Whatever. They just reply, but it was in line with the UN resolution. The UN said it was okay, so we must comply with the UN. They're hiding behind the UN. That's your global governance right there. If Gorbachev wants the UN to control things, if the Vatican wants the UN to set up this World Bank, well, there's the UN, plain to see. It's okay to go bomb people. And the politicians seem to be washing their hands of any wrongdoing because the global government said it was okay. If the UN said put your head in an oven, would you do it? You know, grow a backbone for God's sake. Yep, it's really been a crazy couple of weeks, and it gets crazier. Also this week, we've seen the big, the big meetings and talks on the restructuring of the EU, as the idiots desperately try to scramble together a way to fix the EU debt crisis, which probably just means forcing all EU countries to borrow more money to pay for it. And I guess that ties in with this whole Vatican thing, calling for a World Bank. Because you can't fix the EU's debt. So what are they going to do? Are they going to go, oh, what we need is a World Bank to fix all this. We'll keep the EU, we'll keep Hitler's dream, but our only solution may be a World Bank. Maybe that's coming on the horizon. Today is also the day where MPs are debating Britain's membership of the EU. And again, it's another example of the hypocrisy. We invade other countries to give them their freedom, And we don't even have our own sovereignty in this country. This article I'm about to get into is from the Huffington Post. I'll just paste that in. Today, members of Parliament will debate Britain's membership of the European Union. They will then vote on whether the people of Britain should have a referendum to decide whether Britain should remain in or pull out of the EU. So we don't actually get to vote on whether we're ruled by bureaucrats in Brussels, created by the Bilderberg Group. The dictators get to vote on whether we get a vote. And as the article points out, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party are using the whips to force their MPs to vote against a referendum. As far as I'm concerned, that's called a dictatorship. But I thought Gaddafi was the evil dictator. And of course, the big lie over the last few years that was peddled around the media is that David Cameron is a Eurosceptic. And I wrote big articles that showed clearly that he wasn't a Eurosceptic. Well, who's been vindicated now? The mainstream media that call him a Eurosceptic, or the alternative media and websites like mine that point out that he's clearly not? It's very simple. The guy is our Prime Minister and he still won't give us a vote. How Eurosceptic does that sound? I hate the EU, but I'm just going to stay anyway. It doesn't make any sense. Labour leader Ed Miliband said, this is even funnier, the prospect of a referendum would create economic uncertainty our country does not need right now. Okay, so stopping the 40 million a day that goes to the EU and untying us from this sinking debt ship with all these countries that are collapsing and forcing us all to bail them out. Being done with all of that and standing back is making him concerned about the economy. It's doublethink and spin. It's quite remarkable to me. Mr. Cameron insisted he remained firmly committed to bringing back more powers from Brussels, but on demands for a referendum he said the timing was wrong and Britain's national interest was to be part of the EU. I mean, what's he talking about? What does he mean? Our national interest is for us to be in the EU, helping to determine the rules governing the single market, our biggest export market, which consumes more than 50% of our exports and which drives so much of investment in the UK. So he says he wants less powers to the EU, but he's not willing to do anything to remove powers from the EU. Again, it doesn't make any sense. It's just political rambling. You know, it's like saying, oh, I haven't eaten all day. I'm really hungry. I want to go to the shop and buy some food, and I have money in my hand. But I'm not going to do it. I'll just sit and starve. It doesn't make any sense. Then he starts talking about trade and exports, which is the biggest straw man argument that they use for the EU. This stupid idea that if we're not in the EU, then we can no longer trade with EU countries. It's ridiculous. We traded with EU countries before the EU. It started as the European Economic Community, and I don't think that would necessarily be a bad thing. But that was just the way it's been sold to the public. That's how they got the superstate rolling, so they could eventually take away our sovereignty at a later date, which Cameron won't do anything to get back. It's simple. David Cameron, if you're listening, do you want an EU superstate or do you not want an EU superstate? Because remaining in the EU means you agree with the goals of the EU. It's written down on paper. This is taken from the EU website. The goal of the EU is the progressive integration of member states' economic and political systems and the establishment of a single market based on the free movement of goods, people, money and services. To this end, the member states cede part of their sovereignty under the Treaty of the Functioning of the EU, which empowers the EU institutions to adopt laws. So the whole goal of the EU is progressive integration, continually centralizing power both politically and economically. And we're at a point now where we don't even get to elect the EU president. We're at a point where 80% of our laws are made by people we don't know and are never even talked about on our own British TV. And let's go back to the leaked 1955 Bilderberg summary. When they discussed creating the EU, it says, "We need to arrive in the shortest possible time at the highest degree of integration, beginning with a common European market." That was just the beginning. So David Cameron's just pretending that, you know, this is, we need it for trade or whatever. That was never the goal. It's a straw man argument. From the beginning, it was about taking away the power from the people. And another glaringly obvious point here is that UKIP, the UK Independence Party, Nigel Farage and all that, they hold the second highest number of seats in Europe. They represent the people of Britain in Europe. And they were voted because people don't want to be in the EU, and that's what they campaign against. And every time they get a chance to speak in Europe, they rip it to shreds for the fraud that it is. But Labour, who came behind UKIP in Europe, are being given the power over here to veto the referendum. It makes no sense. And we're supposed to be trying to spread democracy around the world when our democracy is broken. And the Conservatives, who got the most seats in Europe for England, pledged and vowed that they would give us a referendum. David Cameron lied, and now they've done the 180. I mean, how obvious does it have to be that we're being scammed? I'm going to take a quick look at the live link to the whole thing that's going down right now, because this is kind of happening today, and I want to stay updated on things. So I'm just flipping over to the Telegraph to see some of the latest tweets and updates and things. A lot of the MPs, it actually seems, are sort of going against Cameron. It says here, Stuart Jackson, Parliamentary Private Secretary to Owen Peterson, oh, this is Northern Ireland, he backs calls for a referendum, even though it will mean losing his job. And that came out at literally 10 minutes ago. Labour's, I can't even pronounce his name, I'm sorry. Labour's Gisela Stewart accused Foreign Secretary William Hague of executing a 180-degree turn from his previous position as she backs calls for a referendum. It actually looks like the MPs are standing up against the fascists. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes. Adam Holloway has told MPs that Britain needs to completely rewire its relationship with Europe. To cheers in the chamber. If you can't support a particular policy, then the honest course of action is, of course, to stand down, and I want decisions to be made more closely by the people they affect, by local communities, not upwards towards Brussels. Very interesting. I'll have to go through all this tomorrow and do an article. But of course, if things like global governance and world banking systems are being kind of battered about, maybe Europe... maybe it doesn't matter about Europe anymore, who knows. Something we're going to have to analyse and look at. 5 minutes left. Quickly before we go, I also want to share a personal story with everyone. Just an example really of how police powers are being completely abused for things that aren't even a crime. My cousin basically was outside of the local nightclub here in town on a Saturday night at closing time, 3 in the morning. And as always, there's teams of police outside. You can't find a policeman in the middle of the day. We've got about 2 on duty and like 2 more PCSOs, but sometimes, but somehow, I mean, for nightclubs they can get loads. It's a bit weird, but my cousin swore, that horrible crime of swearing. And he wasn't swearing at a passerby, he wasn't swearing at a policeman, he was swearing to his mate while they were having a conversation. Which is not surprising when a young lad crawls out of a nightclub at 3 in the morning. Now, it wasn't aggressive, they weren't arguing. People swear, it's life, fuckity fuck, arse, cunt, giant, I don't know, you get the idea. But one of the nearby police officers thought it was appropriate to give my cousin an £80 fine. And I was there, but I wasn't in the immediate vicinity, so I couldn't start arguing with the policeman and asking him what law and all this kind of thing. But after the fact, I did some Googling, and it turns out police in certain areas have been given the power to issue on-the-spot fines for antisocial behaviour. And this supposedly falls under the 1986 Public Order Act. So now, folks, it's illegal to swear where a policeman can hear you. You will be fined £80. And it's a complete abuse of power, because under the Public Order Act, you only commit an offence when somebody is offended, if somebody feels threatened, if they're intimidated. It's basically to stop people from going nuts in the street and verbally attacking people or saying they're going to hurt people, or do you know what I mean? There's a clear line of what this is and isn't for. The other party in this incident was my cousin's friend, and unless somebody is walking their dog at a strange time of the evening in strange places outside of a nightclub, I'm pretty sure there was no other member of public there to get offended. It was closing time at a nightclub. Most people are drunk. Most people don't care. It's a great British pastime to get drunk. Swearing is a great British pastime. But that seems to be the way we're going. You'll now be fined £80 for swearing. Absolutely ridiculous. Looks like time's up. I hope it hasn't gone off, because I've not got speakers. Anyway, folks, I'm gone. It's already cut off. If you're listening to the archive, then that's been me, and thank you for listening.
If you found the preceding information valuable, please consider buying a DVD or making a small donation of your choosing. Go to wideshut.co.uk/donate. That's wideshut.co.uk/donate. You are the resistance.